The following program has been pre-recorded, so please don't call in at this time. If you wish to participate in the program, tune in at 5 p.m. every Wednesday for A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio. Good evening, fellow humans. This is Wayne Parker with A Pause for Thought here on Baton Rouge Community Radio, 96.9 FM here in Baton Rouge. With me tonight is a young man from Southern University Law Center, Justin Bullard, who is going to talk with us about his part in his research in the restorative justice program for Southern University Law Center. And with him tonight is also Professor Angela Bell from Southern University Law Center, and she's been on here before, and she was one of the main figures in getting the law changed regarding requiring unanimous juries for felony convictions. So I'd like to say a little bit about Justin. Justin is a first-generation law student in his second year at Southern University Law Center in Baton Rouge, where he serves as a research assistant for the Lewis A. Berry Institute for Civil Rights and Justice. He spent his undergraduate years in Clarksville, Tennessee at Austin Peay State University, where he attained a Bachelor of Science in Political Science with a minor in African American Studies. And upon graduation and passing the Louisiana bar, Justin plans to use his early years for skill building before hanging out his own shingle as an advocate for criminal justice reform and civil rights. So we're glad to have you, Justin. And Professor Angela Bell, as I mentioned, was very instrumental in getting Louisiana law changed regarding unanimous juries and many other things. You've been praised and received recognition from many places, too. Can you tell us about yourself?
Certainly. I can tell you that I'm a graduate of the Law Center. I graduated in 1998, and then I spent the first part of my legal career working in an appellate court here in Louisiana. And then I went on after those 10 years to start my teaching career. And then recently I've been named as the director of this Lewis A. Berry Civil Rights Institute, who obviously has a mission towards civil rights in the South as well as in the state of Louisiana. But more importantly, we are seeking to establish ourselves as a place of excellence when it comes to research and advocacy concerning civil rights, social justice, and restorative justice.
Okay. Well, that's a lot. I've asked this of all of the teams so far, but I'd like to ask you also, Justin, what is your take on restorative justice? Why is it relevant today? I know why this story is relative, but...
It's more of an abstract term, and what it is essentially the healing process of injustices. And so that happens in multiple forms, as you've probably seen. And in this particular case, it happens through ideas of preservation, but it goes back in time and tries to undo those wrongs. Undo those injustices that maybe the people have suffered or different things along those lines.
But this is not a legal approach to undoing them, is it?
Well, I think it can take place in a legal form as well. I think the advocacy may start at the ground amongst just the people, and I think from there it builds. So where it might have started from people advocating, it then evolved into, in this case, a proclamation, and then it evolves into preservation. So I think it can be legal as well.
First thing that really blew me away with all of this project, you didn't take this stuff lying down. You gave it back. And it's important for today's African Americans to know that history, to know that you can and must make a fight.
I would agree, and I think that history has been suppressed, and that's one of the motivations for being certain that we tell this story and tell it properly. We think back to the 1700s when Louisiana was really getting into the business of slavery, and there was a man named Juan St. Malo who, as a slave, organized the first act of resistance in the state of Louisiana and was able to successfully create maroon communities where these maroons escaped from the slave system and lived very successfully in the marshes and the wilderness of Louisiana to the point that they began to pose a threat. and the state had to silence that maroon activity. And then after that, we can't forget in 1812, we had the largest slave revolt in the United States here in Louisiana once again. So Malik falls in line with a long, untold history of revolutionaries who have been resisting oppression in the state of Louisiana.
Okay, and by Malik, you mean Malik Rahim?
Correct.
Who is the subject of our discussion tonight. And let me just say briefly that Malik Rahim is a hero and legend who, in his lifetime, has impacted thousands of people in Louisiana, California, and the world. And he is a hero because he's still alive.
Absolutely.
That's good. I'm glad to see that he's going to be able to see that he's getting the recognition now for what he has done. But he's the loving father of 7, is a native and current resident of Algiers, Louisiana, and he was a member of the United States Navy, which I was too.
Well, actually, it was the Marines. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. In his early years, and he later started the Louisiana chapter of the Black Panther Party in an effort to promote self-sufficiency amongst African Americans. And the only civil rights activist that I know of that was known for promoting self-sufficiency was Malcolm X, and he's one of my heroes. So I'm glad to see that there were others out there, and that Malik is still out here making a fight. Okay, so Justin, tell us just exactly who is Malik Rahim.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start with the things just beyond average human features. Is Malik is a father. And this was extremely important for him to note and for me to note as well. Malik is a son. Malik is a brother. And Malik also is a revolutionary. So Malik's work started, again, as you kind of noted, with his work with the Marines, to which he was honorably discharged and then later began to co-found the Louisiana chapter of the Black Panther Party. To which they were doing really, really, really good things that were the foundations of the Black Panther parties at the time, which was their signature breakfast programs, where in this case, in Malik's case, they fed up to 400 children a day. Sickle cell awareness, they were starting health clinics, different things like that, to which they were trying to bring notoriety to a lot of issues that were plaguing black communities. They were trying to capture all of these different things. Then moving into what I guess was known as the Desire Street Shootout. And this was when you have to imagine at this time, Malik is 22 years old. The Panthers at this time range from literally teenagers to where the oldest was maybe 27. And over 100 police officers showed up military style.
Okay, before we get into that shootout, I wanted to mention that from what I've seen, the Black Panther Party at that time was basically a social welfare organization. They were activists. They were, and I'm saying this because when I was a kid growing up in New Jersey, all I knew about was, they're scary, they're armed, they're angry, they're going to kill us all, and that wasn't the case, obviously, but that's the history that I was taught, or the information I got as a child, a white kid up in New Jersey. And
that narrative is unfortunately still prevalent, and that is a part of our commitment to this project, to be sure that we present the counter narrative, because the Black Panther Party was so much more than just some black men with weapons. This party was actually founded by Huey Newton, who was in law school at the time,
right,
who was responding to the fact that there were issues with police brutality. And most of the work they did, he and Bobby Seale, who was also a college student, was based in law. And when they possessed those weapons, they were legal, those weapons.
Right.
And they walked with law books to essentially intervene in cases of police brutality and racial profiling.
Right.
Many of the Panthers also are veterans. They were men who served their country. Like, for example, Geronimo Pratt, who was from Morgan City, Louisiana, at his memorial was the first time the world found out he had multiple Purple Hearts. And that was not unusual. So these people were not gangsters. They weren't outlaws. They weren't anti-government. They were about social progress. They were about empowering the people in their communities. And the governor of Louisiana, when they decided to begin their chapter here, went on local television and made it very clear that they weren't welcome here. And I think his direct words is that they would be shot between the eyes.
Right.
And that is why they got the response they got. It was not because they were doing anything predatory. In fact, they had taken residents in the Desire Housing Project, and when they left, the crime rate had gone down drastically.
Right. Okay, well, so what prompted this? I mean, they set up here in Baton Rouge?
Well, no,
or was
in
it New Orleans?
Yeah.
Okay. They said they rented a building or some rooms and occupied that and were based out of that, right?
Yeah, so that was their office, but it was an apartment. And so what happened was, from all these pressures, again, from the governor and things like that, they were evicted. And instead of an ordinary eviction process, police officers show up with bearing arms and rifles and then proceed to shoot, actively shoot into an apartment, essentially, full of teenagers. We're talking children here. You know, and I think that the other thing that doesn't really come up too is somebody actually did die, but it actually wasn't the Panthers. It was a person in a neighboring house.
Wow.
Yeah. So there was a victim here, you know, for an eviction.
There was a fatal victim.
Fatal victim.
Yeah. It wasn't even related to the eviction. Really.
Exactly. And luckily, all of the Panther members that were there survived, and they actually weren't harmed by it. So they walked out without a physical scratch, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I have a question. You mentioned shootout.
Yes.
Did they fire back?
So there was no known note of firing.
They did not. And the reason why they were prepared for this encounter that Justin describes is because it wasn't the first, it was the second. The first time they took an occupancy at a facility, they had the misfortune of selecting a house that was owned by a local judge. And the judge, of course, made this lease not knowing they were the Panthers. And once the police force informed him that his tenants were the Panthers, he promptly evicted them. And
Right.
it disrupted operations. So this second time that Justin talks about, they actually prepaid the rent for 3 months to be sure that they had some security based on
Right.
the first incident. And knowing what happened in the first incident, they made sure to be prepared when the police came this time. So one of the things they did, by them being veterans, was they lined the walls with sandbags because they didn't want to engage in any warfare with the
Right.
police, but they wanted to be safe when the police came.
So just
So they did not fire back.
and just like all the peaceful resistance, the lunch counter sit-ins and whatnot, the activists were very careful to not give any legitimate reason to arrest them or charge them with things, and that's an important thing to remember. You were going out of your way. Mm-hmm. These people were going out of their way to avoid committing any offense that could be used against them, and they still, were shot up. What happened after the police attack?
Yeah, well, they eventually surrendered, and they were arrested, and they actually had to serve a year in prison. So they were charged with, each was charged with 5 counts of attempted murder. Nobody knows where they got the number 5 from. And especially when we talk about there was no firing back, we don't understand where the attempted murder came from.
No kidding. Well, we know where it came from, just out of the air, yeah.
Right.
Out of somebody's mind.
But the beautiful end to this story is that they had a jury trial. That's the most important thing, particularly at this moment when we just as a state validated how important we view juries. That jury exonerated these men after hearing all of this evidence about them being supposed attempted murderers, and they were all exonerated.
Okay, but I see here he served a year in prison, 3 months on death row, and 9 months on the Panther tier?
Awaiting that trial that I
Awaiting
just
the trial.
mentioned. So that's how
Okay.
long they waited. And they created a special tier for them because a lot of times penal institutions will profile people without any good reason and deem them bad people. And based on their subjective declaration that this is a bad person, they'll often house them in solitary, or they'll put them on a tier away from everyone else. And that's what they were subjected to. But that jury heard all that evidence, and that jury decided that these men did not do what they were accused of, and they were all exonerated. But the problem is there was no compensation package for any of them. No one from the state gave an apology, an acknowledgement. They were left to then decide if they were going to hide, if they were going to continue to be activists after this. And what's beautiful about this is the average person would have taken that as a warning that you might want to cease these activities. But they have all continued to be activists throughout their lives, including Malik, who's now well into his 70s, who has recently survived a stroke and was on the phone with me yesterday reminding me that we have an obligation to not forget the 50th year anniversary of this chapter. So he is very much committed to the work of not only the Black Panthers, but social justice, human rights, housing rights, prisoner rights. This man has a heart to serve, and what many people would have probably now been accepted into the high of government offices for the work that he's done, he has never received what he is due.
No. I don't think any African-American activists have. And hopefully that's going to change while he's still alive. But, okay, but now, why was he put on death row for 3 months?
Well, there's an official answer and an unofficial answer.
Well, I guess in this instance, I guess you can say it kind of targets why were the Panthers even a target from government in general.
That was the point of my asking the question.
I think, and that prompted me even in my research to go and do research on the entire, in the start of it. And then you touched on it earlier, too, about the, what exactly was the problem, like your interpretation being from New Jersey.
Yeah.
And then you forget that they were exercising rights. They weren't breaking the law. So we talked again about restorative justice. They were exercising rights. But in some kind of way, they were painted as these monsters for exercising the same rights that they fight now about with the Second Amendment that they use, like the Bible. You see, so it's very important to note that. So they were sent to death row for 3 months. So a lot of these things also were scare tactics. So we talk about the 3 months they spent on death row. We talk about the Panther tier. Well, the Panther tier, the people that were in the Panther tier were specifically sentenced to the Panther tier to harm and scare the Panthers. Well, what ended up happening was that's where Malik began to meet the Angola 3. You see? So what they intended on harming them actually turned into solidarity, and that formed the first prison chapter, essentially, of the Black Panther Party.
Okay. And I would add, too, that creating a Panther tier gives the impression to people who don't know any better that it's a special place for really dangerous people, that we need to keep them separate from everybody else. Mm-hmm. Whereas basically they were showing them and other African Americans that might get uppity, so to speak, that that you're going to be treated especially badly if you get sent here. Absolutely. And it was.
But I want to also make it very clear that that was not happenstance. That was the brilliant vision of J. Edgar Hoover, who was the then director of the FBI. And what many people didn't know at the time of his life was that J. Edgar Hoover had created inside the walls of the FBI a PR arm. And they are the people responsible for creating the narrative about these Panthers, and this was a way of reinforcing that narrative, of course.
Of course, yes. And, yes, I know some about J. Edgar Hoover, and I know that he was a creep, at best. At best, he was a creep. Okay, you mentioned the Angola 3, and that Mr. Rahim met them while he was there. Who were the Angola 3?
Yeah, so you're talking about Mr. Elbert Wilcox, Mr. Robert King, and Mr. Herman Wallace. And so, what we spoke about just a little bit earlier was just about Elbert Wilcox, who spent over 40 years in solitary confinement. And so upon meeting these men who then took on that revolutionary ideal and ideology, he pledged to them that he would fight for them when he got out.
40 years in solitary confinement, and he kept his sanity?
Yeah, that's
They will often argue with you that's debatable, but
Well,
also about this moment in time where their lives intersect. It's important that we all understand that those three men were not nice men at that point. They were engaged in criminal activity. The
Right.
three of them were strangers to each other as well. They didn't know each other. But when they put them on that Panther tier with Malik, that is when the moment happens that they befriend each other and that they all get politicized. And the late Herman Wallace told me this story, and he's the person that introduced Malik to me, and I want to share it just to give you some insights into who Malik is. But Malik knew that he had family that would come to bond him out and to see about his needs. And he happened to observe Herman Wallace trying to walk in shoes that had gotten wet, and as a result, they had shrunk so small, Herman could not get them on his feet. But they were escorting them to court, and Herman was struggling to keep these shoes on, and Malik gives Herman his shoes and walks into court without shoes. And Herman told me that story as a suggesting to me how selfless Malik was, that he would have opted to go with no shoes before he would watch Herman, who at that moment was a stranger to him, to not have shoes.
right, but that selflessness and his energy, I guess, and foresight were some of the things probably that won over Messrs. Wood, Fox, Wallace, and King to change their lives and join him in the cause. And that's actually what saved them when they got out, right?
And they all credit him for that. It
Yeah.
was that information that they learned on that tier about how they got to be the people they were, the education or the miseducation got
Right.
corrected, and it caused them to want to do the very same thing to others that Malik had done for them, which is what inspired, as Justin talked about that first Panther chapter at Angola. The reason they did that was exactly why they wanted to educate the men at Angola who were sexual predators and who were very violent men and harming other men, that this is not the way African American men should treat each other.
Right.
And Malik often talks about the fact that the black-on-black crime rate would nowhere near have gotten as bad in New Orleans had the work of the Panthers not been interrupted, because they were very effective in addressing that in those communities.
No, they had a direct interest in it and a direct involvement and connection, too.
Yes.
As opposed to many of the government efforts to solve these problems, which they usually only involve white people. But
Correct.
yeah, so... Well, okay, so in your notes, Justin, you say beat the case. Is this all three of the Angola three, or
no. So
it was just...
I got in some trouble about beat the case, but that was the exoneration. That was the jury trial to which they were rendered not guilty.
This is the guy, the Black Panthers.
Yeah, this is just the Black Panthers.
Right,
Though. That's,
okay.
that's not the Angola 3.
Okay. All right. Let's see. We only have a few minutes left. It goes by fast. So Malik was also very active in post-Katrina activities in New Orleans, was he not?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So he's been, this is modern times when he's still out there. At the time he was, 14 years younger, so 56. That's not too old. I'm 62. But anyway, he even recently he's been very active and helpful. Tell us about the post-Katrina work that he did.
Yeah, so upon Katrina happening, Malik decided, like many other people in the New Orleans area, to stay. And so once he stayed and things got really, really bad, he turned his own home into essentially a hub. And this hub became known as the Common Ground Collective. So this is where materials were brought. This is where volunteers stayed. So can you imagine thousands of people having to camp out at your house? So the materials were made. They organized there. This was the place of organizing. And I guess what was so interesting about it was even in this organization, Malik's aide, he couldn't even get a lot of the stuff that he needed even though he might have been the face behind it. So he had to often send other people to go do things that he should have been able to do. Another big thing they did too that I probably didn't note was they brought light to the horrible things being done by vigilantes in the area. Where they were taking up arms, killing black people and poor people, just at whim.
This is after Katrina?
This was after, yeah. That's I guess that's the most important part about it is people don't realize these things aren't old.
No, and like I was just fixing to say, I remember I lived in South Mississippi during Katrina, which, by the way, was a whole lot worse than Katrina than New Orleans, but that's just an old grudge. But all I heard about was the one cop that killed one black man.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you're telling me they were, and when you say it, it makes perfect sense to me that there would be white vigilantes going around shooting African Americans because there was no law there was no
That's exactly
social
right.
structure, no infrastructure, so they could.
And this was in Algiers, and what was interesting about it is Malik was actually able to document several of these vigilantes on camera willing to say that they will shoot and kill with impunity, and that's exactly what happened. Only one of them was ultimately charged, and that charge just happened after 2017, and he was sentenced and died, so he hasn't even faced any justice for that.
I saw that story, yeah.
But the other thing about Malik's story that's intriguing to me is that this was never just a local figure. Malik has built national and international relationships. And what Malik did after Katrina, if you very carefully examine it, because he won't tell you this, it is the blueprint of what the Black Panthers did. So it is the same program, giving people food for free, giving people medical care for free. It was the Panthers in action again post-Katrina. But Malik was able to get volunteers from all over the globe.
Right.
And a lot of these medical doctors and servants came in helicopters, landed in his yard because his home had not flooded. So literally, this was a site of operations. And it speaks volumes of his heart that he would not be flooded and be concerned about other people, but also the fact that when he would place a call for a doctor to show up out of state, they would come. That's the kind of person Malik is. He's developed a reputation where people know that he doesn't show up for press. He has no agenda. He's not trying to run for an elective office. So when he calls, it's from the heart. It's serious, and he's going to get out there and get dirty right along with the people he has to work.
Right, and like I mentioned earlier, that's probably a large reason for his success and for his ability to attract people from all over the world, because you can recognize when somebody is being sincere.
That's
and
absolutely
caring.
right.
Well, he finally got a little bit of recognition, I think, from the Baton Rouge Advocate, was it, or was it New Orleans Advocate? I mean, they're kind of both the same. But recently, I'm looking at a January 20th article from this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so, and that was actually the beginning of when I got involved with the project. Is we co-hosted an event at Southern University in New Orleans that honored Malik Rahim as a living legend. To which we gave him the proclamations from the city, and then a recognition from Baton Rouge as well, from the capital. So that was the founding of it. That was the beginning of it. But as you mentioned, and as we kind of just went through this timeline, this is almost 50 years later.
Yeah.
So and it is great that it has happened before he has passed. But this could have easily been done a lot sooner. Sooner.
Sure. Well, there were reasons why, though.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, the power structure isn't going to let that out. I mean, that's a dangerous thing, to let people know they can actually have power and affect their own futures and their presence. And for African Americans, knowing that their forebears did is empowering. Also,
absolutely.
I mean, it excites me because I think, wow, like I said, you haven't been taking this stuff lying down, and you're not now,
And what touched us mostly about that story you referenced is that we advertised because this was a reporter who sat in the audience and felt motivated by what was witnessed to capture and preserve it. That came so many years late. there were Mardi Gras Indians, and there were attributes from poets and, songwriters and dedications. He was well recognized that afternoon, and it was the start of a much larger conversation that needs to be had surrounding this.
Totally agree, and I'm disappointed that apparently Malik Rahim isn't getting any further publicity, is he? I mean, in our media.
Well, that's because you don't know us well enough yet. But because anytime we're involved, it's going to get done.
Right.
So
okay.
we're on the job. It's getting ready to start happening. That this will be a part of household conversations very soon.
Good. Yeah, because I'm thinking there ought to be a documentary.
I
or
agree.
Something else.
I absolutely agree.
As a matter of fact, I'd like to see a documentary on the whole history of African Americans fighting for the civil rights.
Yes.
Well, I think too. I think that just highlights exactly the importance of this type of project, is because one, it accomplishes that initial goal of making sure we get Malik recognized for his work, so that we, one, highlight what he did, but then two, highlight for generations to come how it can be done.
Right.
And then also we now start motivating some people to get a fire up under them for the Maliks that are around them.
Yep.
You see, so it's and as we mentioned in the beginning, it's a whole bunch of people that have not been heard, who may go to the grave with these stories.
Yes.
And one of the things Malik said to me upon first conversation, this is one of the things that made me really kind of dive into this project, is he talked about the importance of sharing this knowledge from an elder's standpoint. And that every time an elder died and didn't share this knowledge, can you imagine a library being burned down?
Yeah.
You know.
In any case, you've been listening to Wayne Parker on A Pause for Thought. I've been discussing living legend Malik Rahim. Justin Bullard, I appreciate your research and coming on here, and Professor Angela Bell, I thank you for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.